Okay. So this is over that glucose 6 phosphate dehydrogenase deficiency. Yeah, long name. If I refer to it again, I'll just call it a G6PDH. So this is the enzyme of interest. So this is a disease that affects 400 million people worldwide, but the major components of this number is divided into 25% of all people of Mediterranean descent, as well as a good portion of this 400 million are people of African descent. So this is the most, with this number being this high, this is the most, it's the most, most common enzymopathy in existence. So it is really important. In terms of just the scale, it affects 25% of all peoples of Mediterranean descent. That probably clues you into the fact that it is a X-linked recessive. It's an X-linked recessive disorder, meaning that it is found almost exclusively in men, due to the fact that it's X-linked. However, women can exhibit certain symptoms of this disease due to the fact that heterozygous females can carry a copy of this gene defect, and due to very random X chromosome inactivation, they can present with some of the symptoms, although it wouldn't be as severe as within men due to its nature as an X-linked recessive disorder. So this enzyme, G6PDH, is involved in the very first reaction of the pentose phosphate pathway. So I'm just going to abbreviate the name for this at this point is not important when talking about the glucose 6-phosphate dehydrogenase deficiency. So the pentose phosphate pathway is really important because it's able to produce NADPH as well as nucleotides. Or I guess the bases for these nucleotides. So building on this, what we see is that the major thing we want to look at here is NADPH. We don't really care about the nucleotides at this point, so we're more concerned about the NADPH in reference to this disease. So the very first reaction of the pentose phosphate pathway is the conversion of glucose 6-phosphate. So again, this is being done by G6PDH to 6-phosphogluconate. This reaction in itself, or rather this product, is not important. The product here is not important. The important bit is this production of reduced NADPH from oxidized NADP+. Okay? So this is the major benefit of this enzyme in terms of looking at oxidative stress, which is what glucose 6-phosphate dehydrogenase deficiency has to work with. So this NADPH is important because it works with glutathione to combat oxidative stress within the body. So NADPH works with this other enzyme called glutathione reductase. So this enzyme is able to convert oxidized glutathione, which is commonly written as GSSG. Okay, so this is the oxidized glutathione. So this enzyme, with the help of NADPH, is able to convert oxidize glutathione into how it's written as 2-GSH, which you can infer from this is the reduced glutathione. Now, again, as alluded to earlier, this NADPH is required for this enzyme to facilitate this reaction, meaning that this NADPH formed will be converted into NADP+. So this is the oxidized form. So it's oxidized and reduced. Now, in people with normal glucose 6-phosphate dehydrogenase, this NADP+ is able to be converted into NADPH via formation of 6-phosphogluconate with the pentose phosphated pathway. However, assuming we were to kill this enzyme, we would have a buildup of NADP+, and we wouldn't have any NADPH, meaning that glutathione would begin to just remain in this oxidized form. So if we go down the line, we can see what is actually facilitating this, facilitating this conversion as well. So this reduced glutathione works with peroxidase, which is a reactive oxygen species, and is able to convert that into water. So we can draw that out here as well. So there's another enzyme called glutathione peroxidase. So this enzyme, glutathione peroxidase, is able to convert peroxides as such into water. So this is a reactive oxygen species which can cause damage in the body, which I will allude to shortly, into water. Now this enzyme, while converting a peroxide to water, is also converting reduced form of glutathione into the oxidized form of glutathione. So if we were to go back again, assuming that a patient has this deficiency, we will see a buildup of NADP+ due to the fact that this this enzyme will convert this NADPH into this NADP+. Because when oxidative stress is occurring in the body, this enzyme is still going to be it's still going to be active, but in doing so, it's going to deplete all NADPH stores. So in doing so, we'll see a dramatic decrease in NADPH, one, because it's being used by this enzyme, and two, because no more is being produced. So we see an increase in NADP+, while also seeing a buildup of oxidized glutathione. If there's a buildup of this, it means there's a reduction of this, reduced glutathione. Reduced glutathione is needed for glutathione peroxidase to do its job of degrading peroxides and other reactive oxygen species. Because there's a reduced, or rather a reduction in the amount of this reduced glutathione, this enzyme is not able to do its job, meaning that we have we will begin to see an accumulation of peroxides. So this becomes problematic because an accumulation of peroxides leads to hemoglobin denaturation. So what this is doing, so this denaturation via oxidative damage is causing hemoglobin to become insoluble. Now, hemoglobin normally is soluble, and I'll draw this out. We can see it within our red blood cells. But when we have a bioaccumulation or rather just an accumulation of peroxides, hemoglobin begins to get denatured and becomes insoluble. When it becomes insoluble, it begins to precipitate. This precipitation leads to the accumulation of hemoglobin near the membranes, and this is assuming we're looking at it as a slide in a microscope. This is what we could see, and even if you like Google this image, you would be able to see these actual bodies within the cells. So these objects are called Heinz bodies, and these are just denatured and precipitated hemoglobin. Now, what is interesting about this is that denatured hemoglobin means that you're not able to hold and bind oxygen as the hemoglobin is becoming denatured. Now, most people don't even know they have this defect until they encounter some severe oxidative stress. So this can be induced via like a severe infection, or if they start taking certain anti-inflammatories. But that I can put in like another lecture, because that goes into another mechanism. But basically, the onset of this is due to a dramatic increase in oxidative stress. This oxidative stress will overwhelm these patients because they are unable to reduce glutathione, which leads to increase in peroxidase levels, which leads to denaturation of hemoglobin, while also leading to the lipid membrane peroxidation, and ultimately leading to hemolytic anemia. This hemolytic anemia is also onset when we have when we have a macrophage. So what these macrophages can do is that they see these Heinz bodies and they register them as being foreign. So macrophages will come in and they'll see the Heinz bodies and they'll just take a bite out of the cell, and they'll only devour those Heinz bodies, meaning that our new cell has a giant bite taken out of it. So this is our new cell. And these cells are conveniently named bite cells, or the scientific name, the degmacyte. So not only are these membranes weaker due to lipid membrane peroxidation, but they also from time to time have small chunks of them eaten away by macrophages. All of this together can induce hemolytic anemia. So denaturation, peroxidation, and the bite from these macrophages, obviously hemolytic anemia. So these red blood cells just begin to lyse and just start releasing their contents. And in doing so, you would see a buildup of things in like blood work. So you would see an increase in, for example, bilirubin. So these patients exhibit bilirubinemia, for example. In terms of like actual blood work, I can do another side thing for that. I think one thing I can also mention is this peroxide. Is that you might be wondering where peroxide actually comes from. So peroxide can come from two sources. First of all, it can come from oxygen, like just diatomic normal oxygen can be converted into a superoxide anion spontaneously. Another way we can have formation of the superoxide anion is within hemoglobin. So hemoglobin contains iron, which actually binds the oxygen. The issue is with this iron, when it's in the 2+ state, it can normally bind oxygen. However, via oxidative damage, we can have a conversion of the ferrous state into the ferric 3+ iron state, which is unable to bind oxygen. in doing so, releases this radical, this anion, the superoxide anion. So this here is that superoxide anion that I was alluding to earlier, and this is acted upon via an enzyme called superoxide dismutase. This enzyme converts the superoxide into the peroxide, this H2O2. This, again, as explained, is this peroxide here, and it's able to be degraded into water via enzyme glutathione peroxidase. What's interesting about methemoglobin is that it can't, so no binding O2. It can't bind any oxygen because of this 3+ state. However, it can dramatically increase the affinity of oxygen for the 2+ ferrous state. So because hemoglobin can have 4 iron ions, we can have some danger, because if it means we can get to the point where all of these are in the 3+ state. If all of these are 3+ state, this hemoglobin molecule cannot bind any oxygen. However, even if one of these subunits is in the 3+ state and the rest are in 2+, these three can still bind oxygen. So these, they can still bind oxygen. The issue is that this one can't, but this 3+ state can increase the affinity for the 2+ iron to bind oxygen and hold it. This means that you'll also begin to see hypoxia within these patients, because although they might have a majority of their subunits that are still able to bind oxygen, because of this 3+ state, the hemoglobin holds oxygen that much tighter and prevents oxygen release to tissues that are oxygen deprived. So in doing so, another common finding in some of these patients is that they become cyanotic and hypoxic due to lack of oxygen delivery due to this 3+ state of the oxidative damage. So that's a general overview of this glucose 6-phosphate dehydrogenase deficiency. I'll probably make another part 2 looking at lab work as well as some treatments for this disease.